For those of you who are in the class with me, I will put up the large display in just a minute. So welcome to the Experimental Weaving Talk Series. This is a talk series we've been hosting. This is the third iteration. I believe we started 2 years ago, and we've had such a wonderful array of speakers come, and we're really excited to welcome Bhakti Zeek today to join us. So one of the interesting things about this talk series is that we broadcast it online for a public community, but we also are broadcasting it in a class that I teach at CU Boulder called Experimental Textiles. So we're sort of live in all possible realities for the moment. Just wanted to give a little shout out to the group of folks who've been helping us organize and who make up the Unstable Design Lab. If you'd like to learn more about our research labs and the projects that we're doing at the intersection of sustainable textiles and woven textile design, both for jacquard and floor looms, you're welcome to check out our website. One of the main projects we've been working on and have some support now to grow into a larger community is a open source weave drafting software called AdaCAD. So AdaCAD takes a parametric approach to making woven drafts, which is slightly different than what's currently available, but is capable of making drafts for both jacquard and floor looms. So you're welcome to check that out as well. But, one more slide. I wanted to give one final shout out to the YouTube archive. So after each talk, Stephen very lovingly converts the recording into a YouTube recording, so you can watch this online. If you want to share it with friends or maybe integrate it into your own curriculum, you are more than welcome to do so. Okay, so without further ado, I'd love to welcome Bhakti Zeek, who is our distinguished speaker of the day. Bhakti is a well-known, and I've come to realize much beloved member of the weaving community, specifically because of her strong influence in the world of jacquard weaving and digital jacquard weaving. I've had the pleasure of meeting with Bhakti for some other reasons before this, and she's incredibly generous and inspiring, and I'm just really excited to learn more from you today, Bhakti. So thank you so much for joining us, and I will turn the screen over to you now. Maybe while Bhakti's getting set up, we could all do a virtual round of applause. So if you just want to type hello or clap or something in the chat, it helps give a little sense of liveness to the speaker. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. And can you just see the slide? Okay. So thank you, Laura. And thank you, Etta and Stephen, for facilitating this talk. I'm going to talk about different looms and how they've affected my weaving practice, which extends over more than 50 years. And I want to have enough time to share some questions at the end. So I'll try to talk quickly. Actually, okay. Okay, so weaving is a refuge for me. And in these troubled times, I get a sense of perspective and balance when I think of the long history of weaving. I'm calling this talk Continuity because the principle of weaving is always the same, whether you're looking at historic textiles or a contemporary one. At the intersection of the warp and weft, there are only two possibilities. The warp is over the weft, or the weft is over the warp. For weavers like myself, it's pure magic that these two options can create the most complex imagery imaginable. And you also know that this binary relationship of threads became the principle that was developed into computer coding. You don't need a loom to weave. All you need are your hands and a pliable material, as illustrated by these Nepalese mat weavers from Susie Dunmore's book, Nepalese Textiles. And I believe Stephen is going to put in the chat all of the references that I'm mentioning. You probably did some paper weaving in grade school, though I doubt it was as complicated as this representation of a takate structure using 3 wefts. Lots of contemporary textile curators and historians learned weave structure using their hands and paper strips from the brilliant textile scholar and curator Milton Sande. Most of them have never sat at a loom, but this type of paper weaving taught them to distinguish between different woven structures. This is one of the paper examples from Louise Mackey's incredible book, Symbols of Power. I've co-authored 2 books in my career. The first, on the left, was on backstrap weaving, and I was Judy Zeke de Rodriguez at the time, and Nona was my mother. And the one on the right, with Alice Schlein, is on jacquard weaving. In a way, these represent the polar opposites on the wide spectrum of loom technology, but they encapsulate what draws me to weaving. I'm fascinated by looms of all types. This Peruvian weaver was at the International Folk Art Festival in Santa Fe this summer. I hung out with her a long time, though no words were exchanged, and I marveled at her patience and was reminded about the intricate textiles that are possible using the simplest of tools. A loom keeps the warp threads under tension, and a backstrap loom, like this one, has the weaver at one end creating tension against the other end, which is tied to something stable, like a tree trunk, a doorknob, a house beam. There's no element like a reed to keep the threads spaced evenly, but most weaving on a backstrap loom that I've studied is warp-faced, like this woman's warp. The high density of the warp tends to keep the web of the cloth at the intended width. Here you see another backstrap weaver, a Nepalese woman also from Susie Dunmore's book. To separate the warp into 2 sheds that form a plain weave, she has a heavy stick with half the warps going over it and half going under it. And she has a heddle rod made with a continuous thread that's situated in front of the heavy stick. If the weaver leans forward just slightly, she relaxes the tension on the warp and can pull the heddle stick up, thus raising the threads that go under the heavy stick. It's simple, but ingenious, and this kind of loom is found all over the world. This is one of my backstrap looms, unfinished when I left Guatemala in 1976, and not touched since then. Look at the beautiful strap that hand-woven that holds the weaver to the loom, and the patina of most of the sticks, including the beater. My mother was baffled by the packages of sticks that I kept sending to her house over the years I lived in Guatemala. But those sticks, my looms, were very precious and hard to come by. When I first got to Santiago Atitlan, my first weaving town, I found a teacher relatively easily because everyone sent me to Wani. She had taught a young foreigner before me, so she was forever the teacher in that town. But I needed the sticks of the loom to start my lessons, and it took me almost a month before I found anyone willing to part with their tools. After that, anytime I found a weaver willing to sell a loom, I would purchase it. Backstrap looms enable you to have 4 selvages. So if that's an element you want in your work, this is a good loom to investigate. I learned brocade techniques in Guatemala, and I still incorporated them in my work. Each town has its own form of supplementary weft brocade, and in those years, the weavers did not know the techniques used in other towns, even if they were neighboring villages. This isn't true today, but when I was there, I could tell where a Mayan person lived by their traje, that is, by their clothes. I loved that their clothing was an essential part of their identity, and I was quite jealous that I only had jeans. You can see that the warp is so dense, you don't see the ground weft at all, and the supplementary weft sits on the surface as if the cloth is embossed. Most non-weavers think that the images are added through embroidery, and of course some villages did incorporate embroidery in their work, but most of the textiles I studied were fully woven. The use of variegated embroidery thread was not my idea. In fact, none of the work I did in Guatemala was my original creativity. I understood how important it was that I copied my teacher's fabrics, even using the same color combinations as she had. Every day, a group of older women would come by to see what I'd done, and they were judging Wani as much as they were judging me. So even if I didn't like orange with black followed by green, and I still did it to show my respect for her. And also, I always knew that I was learning something, and at some future time, on my own, I could use that knowledge in any way I wanted. After I returned to the United States, and with the money I earned from writing the backstrap book, I bought my first floor loom. It was like this, a Maycomber loom, only it was 56 inches wide and had 16 shafts, though we called them harnesses then. That was 1978, and I had it until about 2000. I didn't really know anything about looms, but someone had mentioned Maycomber to me as the best loom on the market. And they also said, buy the largest loom you can afford with the most harnesses. So I did. That year, I moved to Lawrence, Kansas, where I enrolled at the University of Kansas to get a BFA. They had an excellent textile program then, as they still do today. Since I already had a BA, I only needed to take art and design classes. I began painting my warps with Procyon dyes using principles I learned in surface design classes. Then, as I wove, I reacted to the color changes in the warp with brocaded imagery. The little beater I'm using on the right to pick the squares, it's still one of my prized Guatemalan tools. I didn't work from drawings, but would paint the warp threads very spontaneously and then let the color changes suggest the placement of motifs. In a way, it was as if the first pick set everything in motion, and all I needed to do was listen, and the threads would tell me what to do. This weaving, Jataya, was 65 inches wide and 39 inches high, has the warp horizontal in the finished piece. You can see from this detail how I tried to make the brocaded shapes interact with the painted warp. In Journey, another weaving from that time, the geometric shapes became simple lines. I loved how all the lines interacted and built areas of embossed intensity in the cloth, in the same way that I loved the relief of the Guatemalan motifs. I kept trying to simplify the amount of brocading I was doing, but you can see in this weaving, Sugar Blues, that the lines just demanded that I add more and more. Each of these lines was a separate supplementary weft, inserted as I was weaving. If I wove 1/4 of an inch an hour, I felt that the work was moving rapidly. Today, I don't have the patience to do this type of work. In 1984, I was living in Brooklyn at the time that Visual Arts offered the first class on designing wovens with a computer program and an AVL Dobby loom. This is an image of the AVL loom that's at Henry Ford Museum in Michigan, and it's just like the one at Visual Arts, though I don't think that loom had a fly shuttle like this one, and that loom had a computer interface. A Dobby loom is like the floor loom in that it has shafts, 16 on this loom. But instead of treadles connected to the shafts for lifting or sinking, it will only have 1 or 2 pedals. In this case, the right-hand pedal made the connection for lifting, and the left one would clear the lift. Some Dobby looms just have 1 pedal, and as long as you press it down, then the shafts are lifted, and when you remove your foot, the shafts return to a neutral place. On the side of this loom is the Dobby head, which reads the pattern. Each wooden bar represents 1 lift or 1 pick in the cloth, that is, 1 weft shot. Since there are 16 shafts, each bar has 16 holes corresponding to those shafts, and you peg the bars. If you want a shaft to raise, you put a peg in the hole that corresponds to that shaft. The bars are in a loop, so if you wanted to weave plain weave, which just needs 2 sheds, you would have to peg something like 8 bars so the loop would fit around the dobby head. A CompuDobby removes the bar configuration and replaces it with a computer interface that has solenoids inside. Both types of dobby looms allow access to any combination of shafts at any pick of the cloth. Just to be clear, in a 4-shaft loom, there are 14 possible combinations of lifts, from 1 shaft lifted to 2 to 3. With just 4 pedals, 1 attached to each shaft, the weaver can access any of those combinations as long as they can step on more than 1 pedal at a time. An 8-shaft loom has 254 possible combinations of lifts, and there's no floor loom wide enough to have that many pedals. But a dobby loom gives your weaver access to all of them. So a loom like this one with 16 shafts, it has 65,534 possible lifts. I found that on the web. And those wooden bars give access to any of these lifts. So I was doing word processing when the visual arts class was announced, and also working part-time for Jack Leonard Larson. And I did my work on my Maycomber loom in our apartment. The other day, I watched the talk from this series last year by Patty George, and she mentioned that I took her class at Visual Arts in 1984. I don't remember her opening up the box on the loom to show us the solenoids that controlled the lifts, but I do remember that the class was full of textile designers who were so intrigued with the images they were creating on the computer that they completely forgot about the interlacement of threads. So they had warps that never lifted or ones that always stayed up. In other words, they had images that wouldn't weave as viable cloth. Up until this time, though I had 16 shafts on my floor loom, I was still doing brocaded plain weave, which only needed 2 of the shafts. I still didn't understand the loom, though I could read a draft and follow instructions. However, my word processing experiences helped me with the Weave program and the AVL Dobby, and I finally began to understand the relationship between lifting the shafts, lifting the warp threads, and what was going on as cloth. I do remember asking Patty if there was a way to have a weft show in some areas and be hidden in others. And I remember her showing me how the loom was threaded in blocks. Though my memory might be faulty, but I'm pretty sure it was blocks because I wove a little block weave in her class and I began to appreciate weave structure. So this is one of my first weavings on the floor loom that incorporated damask structure, where the cloth is warp face satin in some areas and weft face sateen in other areas. The ground cloth is a painted warp and woven mostly as a warp face satin. If you look at the 2 columns of motifs in the center of the image, the ones on the left, the circle, the square, the triangle, those are brocaded, while the T-shapes in the right are hand-picked weft sateen. In other words, the ground weft shows in the sateen areas and is hidden in the satin areas. And at the same time, there are the supplementary wefts making other shapes. A weft pick did not travel across the cloth in one shed, but through treadling different lifts for the pick, I could go from the warp face satin structure to the weft face sateen. And you can see that these shifts often occurred several times in the path of the weft from one edge to the other. I must have used an 8-shaft straight threading for this cloth, which would have meant 8 petals connected to do the satin structure and 8 petals connected to do the sateen structure. After throwing the ground weft, I then added the brocaded motifs. The back of this weaving is striped with bands of color because I kept changing the weft to modify the weft color that would be visible on the surface, but the density of the warp gave a uniform look to the warp-faced areas. When I began graduate school in 1987, the Cranbrook Fiber Department had just gotten an AVL CompuDobby loom, and I was the only person that knew how to use it. I ran a project where everyone tried the loom, but in the end, it became mine to use for most of the 2 years I was a student. I wove the Wheel of Life Washerwoman Revelation using the same technique of changing the warp lifts as I moved the weft across the web of the cloth, as I had done with the previous damask weavings. I had 3 warps on the loom, like a triple warp setup, but only wove with one weft system. First, I did a lot of experimenting to find different combinations that would act as my color palette to distinguish the different motifs. Then I had to program different sequences of lifts to reflect the combination of weave structures that I was using, and to change those combinations when motifs came and went. I also had to remember to create the lift sequences so they would work correctly from right to left, then reverse the order of structures going from left to right. Honestly, it was a nightmare, but it enabled a weaving I'm still proud of. The large middle section depicts the life cycle we all share from birth to death. The smaller bottom band recounts a mystical experience I had in Mexico. And the top band represents an event, like the sun rising and falling each day, that has gone on long before our species entered the planet and will continue long after we exit. The top band seems especially relevant today. Thinking about geological time gives me a perspective that calms my fears. This detail shows you how I combined the different interlacements of threads to create my imagery. This is another technique that I don't have the patience to do today, but if you're interested in understanding the process of working between different structures, Nancy Searle's book, The Technique of Freeform Design, describes this method for shaft looms. By the end of my graduate program, I returned to an HF Makeomer for my work. But this time, because of the wonderful lectures given by my teacher on the history of textiles, I had learned about narrative textiles that use takate, or lampas, or samatum for their structures. Just the names of the weaves gives me joy, and their possibilities resolve some tension issues I encountered with brocading. I did lots of planning for this weaving because it was quite involved. First, I braided black warp and discharged it, and I braided white yarn and dyed it, creating the color shifts in my warp that I thought would be faster than painting the warp. It wasn't, but I did love the effect. I made painted wefts for each of the 6 panels with images of animals, which were woven as backpicks in the lampas structure that I used. Lampas allows you to throw a weft from edge to edge, but only have it show in parts. But I brocaded my pattern wefts so they only showed in specific areas. And each of the 6 panels has a story on one side and animals on the other. The weaving's title was Wheel of Life, the Passing On of Knowledge. In the interior, I illustrated the story of how monks from Constantinople, under the direction of the Emperor Justinian, traveled to China with hollow canes in search of the secret of silk. They didn't know if it grew on trees, was mined from the earth, or came from an animal. They watched silk being made and hid silk cocoons in their canes and brought the secret back to the West. I love this story because it's part of the history of weaving and because it's a paradox. No one's right. Stealing from others is immoral in my book, but so is hoarding knowledge. It also illustrates how one culture learns from another, whether they acknowledge it or not. There's always been an exchange of ideas and knowledge through textiles and trade. This is the configuration of the piece when it was shown this spring at my retrospective at Form and Concept in Santa Fe. You can see that panels had the painted weft animals on the one face and the silk narrative on the other. The lampas allowed me to place the painted wefts correctly, even though I couldn't see them as I wove. Believe me, It was thrilling to see that it worked when I took the cloth off the loom, and it's still thrilling for me to see this weaving. When I got hired in 1990 to run the woven design program at Philadelphia College of Textiles and Science, I remember the dean saying that it was a problem when you defined yourself as a cutting edge technical college, but the Historical Society was requesting tours of the equipment. I really did witness the end of the Industrial Revolution. In 1991, they threw out all the old jacquard equipment and installed two state-of-the-art, fully electronic digital jacquard looms. When they behaved, they were wonderful, but too often we had to have people at the back and at the front watching things. Do you see the copper wires in the right-hand image? Every warp end was threaded through one of those, as well as the eye of a heddle. The copper units are held up by the tension of the warp. If an end is loose or breaks, the wire drops and the loom stops. These looms do not use shuttles. Cones of yarn, they call them packages in industry, are mounted on a rack and threaded through tensioning devices and into the loom. These looms had 8 selectors. Many looms today have more than that. That means on any pick, you can choose one of 8 or more weft yarns. Since wefts travel from one edge of the cloth to another, and always from the same edge to the other, there's no true selvage. Each weft is cut as it's thrown. A false selvage, or a small ribbon, is woven on the outside of the main cloth, and these hold the cut ends in place so they don't whip back into the main cloth. I was definitely in the right place at the right time. Suddenly I could make work with details like the text of this weaving, which is an entire speech I gave at a symposium in Chicago. I had complete freedom to change the design vertically, but always end up with 4 repeats across the cloth. So if you saw this weaving and liked what I wrote, you could read it again and again and again. This piece, Artist Statement, is in the permanent collection of the Museum of Arts and Design in New York. I want to mention that the first software for the looms that we had was created by a label company, and the largest image you could design was probably less than 6 inches high. So if you needed a larger image, you had to create different files and weave them in sequence. Although the new equipment had many, many possibilities, programmers were being constrained by the limitations of the older tools and ways of thinking. By the time I wove this weaving, the school had gotten donations of 7 different programs. None of them talked to each other, and I was tasked with teaching my students all of them. Basically, I got to teach them to say, "Hello, how are you?" in 7 different languages. It was so frustrating because there was so much more that could be done. For my own work, I chose one of those programs, the one which allowed me a pathway to my work that made sense to me, and I used it almost exclusively. This program allowed great flexibility, and I could create this design, which ended up almost 9 feet high in the weaving in one big file. So I really began to understand weave structures and their possibilities by using the electronic jacquards. People rarely think of weaving as a 3-dimensional process, but it is, as I know many of you understand. Using 4 wefts that built up together to create one visual row of cloth at about 180 picks per inch, I created a series of double-sided weavings. One side would have lots of color and image. The rondelles showed swatches from historical textiles. Since I identify my lineage as that of historical textiles, I put some of my own work in there too. This is one side of History of Fabrics, Barbara Song. You see the full image on the left and the detail on the right. And this is the other side, which has writing that you can read. I scanned pages from my History of Textiles notebook created during Gerhard Nodell's lectures at Cranbrook. I love diagrams and the visuals of math. In this Chinese magic square, all rows and columns and diagonals add up to 15. Learning history through the lens of textiles finally made worlds come to life for me. I was extremely happy when this weaving was on the cover of American Craft magazine in 1998. At the same time I was doing jacquard work at school, I was working at home on my floor loom. I started asking myself, what's the appropriate language for each loom? I could do things on the floor looms, like inserting these supplementary strips of reed in the weft that I couldn't do on the jacquard. Also, by changing the warp density, sheer in the center and very dense on the edges, I allowed the materials and setup to become the language of the work. In the summer of 1997, I was fortunate to study at Fondazione della Sant'Eliseo in Florence, Italy. I was able to produce some handwoven jacquards on 19th century looms. I had to design the fabric on special point paper and cut and lace the cards for each study. On the left, you see a piano cutter. The cards are inserted one by one and punched. Each card represents one lift of the warp. You have to be careful cutting them. If you make a mistake, you have to find that hole and fill it, or find the blank and cut a hole. And it's a very tedious operation once the cards are mounted on the jacquard head. You also need to number each card so you don't get them out of order. On the right is an image of the cards being laced, a process that can easily produce blisters on your hands. This is an old jacquard head. On the right, you can see how the cards are mounted on a square piece of wood that's carefully aligned with the hooks of the jacquard. The wooden cylinder has holes in it that match the holes in the cards. This heavy device is mounted on top of the loom. At Licio, I was able to weave on several looms with different configurations. The textile on the right is a lampas, and the one on the left a patterned damask. I really loved learning how to use the old looms, but felt grateful for the computerized ones back at the college. However, nothing compared to this loom that was set up to weave velvet. True velvet has a ground warp and then a second and sometimes a third warp that creates the pile. To make a figured velvet, each pile warp has to have its own back beam, so it can lift and move freely depending on the image being woven. A velvet loom like this one not only has jacquard heads mounted on top, it also has shafts controlled by a dobby head, and the dobby head is also on top of the loom. This is the little velvet I made at Licio. The dark leaves are cut pile, the gray ground is uncut loops of pile, and the blue stems and leaves are areas of voided velvet where the pile weaves with the ground. You can actually make velvet on just 3 shafts, 2 for the ground and 1 for the pile. And if you paint or e-cut the pile warp, you'll end up with a design in the velvet pile. Of course, you have to remember to elongate your painted image because it takes about 6 times the normal length of a thread to create the pile loop up, over, and down for each loop. But that's a different lecture. When I left academia in 2002, I had files from these 7 different software programs for jacquard that I couldn't access. Each developer had purposely created their programs so they didn't talk to each other. And without the dedicated software, I couldn't open any of them. However, I had read an article about Photoshop written by Alice Schlein, where she reported that Photoshop now had the ability to create pixels that were horizontal or vertical rectangles, not just squares. This opened up the world of weave, where warp and weft are often of different widths, creating intersections that were not square. I contacted Alice, and we spent the next 2 years writing this book, The Woven Pixel, which we self-published in 2006. Now there was a program that didn't cost thousands of dollars. Some of the software I had learned at the college cost over $100,000 a license, and the least expensive at the time cost $30,000. Though there were some features that dedicated Jacquard programs had that were not possible with Photoshop, we found workarounds for most things. And I've been extremely grateful to have this software on my home computer ever since. We no longer sell the book, but you can access it at handweaving.net, and you can download the entire PDF from that site. I imagine some of the menus have changed, but the essential process that we described is still viable, and it's used by weavers all over the world. In the spring of 2007, when my husband and I put our New Mexico straw bale house on the market, we decided that we had to go visit Marfa, Texas, the site of Donald Judd's Chinati Foundation, which is a mecca for contemporary art world. A week or so later, an email was forwarded to me about a used thread controller loom for sale in the town next to Marfa. This was the first TC1 sold on the secondary market, and I got it. I shouldn't have gotten it. I couldn't afford it. But somehow, through barter and luck, it came to me. I'm totally in love with this loom. And even today, when I go in my studio and see it, I feel a rush of joy. In fact, my first weaving on it expressed exactly how I felt. This is a hand loom. I stand at the loom and I throw the shuttle. It has 880 heddles, each one independently controlled, so I can weave an image edge to edge without a repeat. Though, of course, I can create an image within those 880 threads that has a repeat if I want it. Today's version of the loom, the TC2, has some modifications and looks different because the frame is quite different. But the operation of the loom and the Photoshop files I create operate the same on both renditions of the loom. You can think of the loom as having 880 shafts, each shaft with just one thread on it. I can't mention this loom without acknowledging my gratitude to Vibeke Vespi for her vision in creating this loom and her continued dedication and contribution to the world of textiles. Vibeke is a genius. Since 2007, the TC1 has been my main loom. When we lived in a small town in central Vermont for 13 years, I did a lot of weaving on that loom. It was a refuge for me during those difficult political years, and I imagine it will be a refuge again in the upcoming years. This weaving continuum deals with transition and change, big themes in my work and life, as well as monkey mind, the way our thoughts jump from one idea to another, and then quickly to another and to another. The warp is horizontal in the final weaving, so I began at the left edge with a palette of colors, and then the identification of those structures, changed to shaded satins for the tree branches, or are they synapses in the brain? And I ended with the natural world overlaid with some weaving symbols. The ability to change from one type of cloth to another with my TC1 loom is incredibly liberating. This is an image of my work that was at the Fuller Museum in 2013. In Nomad, the large weaving on the right, I filled a map of the world with names of places that I've lived or visited, then removed the map so only the words were left in the shape of the continents. Then I imposed that image on a photograph of the ocean. It's funny, many people read Nomad as constellations rather than tracings of my travels, and they interpret east-west, which is hanging above it, as water rather than sky. Working with Photoshop and the TC1, I was able to make a large image of all 6 panels together, then divide it so I could weave each panel separately. This weaving Nomad is now in the United States Embassy in Mauritania. So in May of 2013, just out of the blue, I received an email from Princeton University asking if I wanted to submit proposals for a permanent installation for the Whitman College Community Hall. Of course, I said yes and sent several proposals, including this image, which had my proposal photoshopped into a photograph of the space that they had provided to me. So this image is an image of the proposal. It's not the final work. There was no place in my house to see the full length of the panels, which were 16 feet high when finished, but the weather was still good when I completed the first panel. I wove 3 panels with letters and 3 panels with numbers. They were the building blocks of how we exchanged knowledge with each other. Here are 3 panels with numbers installed at the site. And here's an image of Stardust permanently installed. It was almost a solid year of work, and it pleased me that it does look like the proposal. It also is funny that people assume it's a church, but in fact, it's a cafeteria. I still like studying weave structures on my looms. I was trying to weave Takate on my TC1, but could not get the beat right. Takate has 2 warp systems and 2 or more weft systems. One warp weaves plain weave with all the wefts, and the other warp hides or exposes those wefts. A Takate, when woven, should show just the weft threads on the surface. You can see that this test was unsuccessful because so much of the warp is showing. So I turned to tapestry to try and find help. I enrolled in an online tapestry course taught by Rebecca Mezoff, who's a wonderful teacher. I've watched her videos so often now, I think of her as a roommate. Of course, I'd done tapestry years ago, even taught it to others, but tapestry seems to exist as a world to itself, separate from other weaving. I was stunned by my response, which can be summed up by the word enthralled. I love designing at the loom without preconceptions, and of course, it reminds me of how I used to work with brocade. It had been years since my fingers were so involved with weaving, not just throwing the shuttle. I had a small tapestry loom, but found I preferred using my Maycomber loom, which is what these studies were woven on. Here's a little tapestry loom I made out of pipes during a course I co-taught at Penland. I never use it, but it's so sweet and it looks good in my studio. Behind it is Takate bands, which I wove on the TC1, testing different warp densities and different types of yarn. As the density decreased and the warp floats got longer, I could beat the yarn without bubbling and would cover the warp. It also helped to use only 2 wefts per row for the Takate rather than 3 or more. I began to understand that I missed the spontaneity I could achieve on a floor or tapestry loom and started making pieces on my TC1 that were created band by band. So in this weaving information, I began at the bottom and like all weavings, wove up. I went from Takate to Samit to Lampas and then double weave and weft back satins. I could never jump from structure to structure like this on a floor loom because my threading wouldn't allow such diversity. Also, I could do variations on the structures with ease, and I had the freedom to modify my motifs as I liked, instead of having to weave from start to finish an image I had created in Photoshop. I still had to work within the constraints of my 880 ends, and I did complete each band as it was designed in Photoshop, but it felt less restrictive than if I had designed everything from start to finish. This is an inkle loom, also known as a belt or tape loom. The very first loom I owned was a Gilmore Inkle, and I had it with me in all my moves until a year or so ago. Then I sold it, thinking, I never use it, so why keep it? Of course, the minute I sold it, I thought of something to make with it. So on my last birthday, I went and bought the Shack Inkle. I wanted to study Andean double weave with some friends, and this loom seemed a good solution, so I wouldn't need one of my other looms. The bands in the background are from Annie McHale's collection, and if you're looking to study band weaving, you couldn't find a better teacher. Well, it did turn out that weaving on the inkle was very flexible. I began with about 10 threads, just to test if my double weave was working. And you can see the small white square woven at the bottom right of the blue band. Those are the first 10 threads. Then I added warps and wove the double weave design, which was doable, but not easy. Since I was aiming for a balanced double plane, I then moved the warps to decrease the set of the warps and rewove the motif, though it's sort of hidden in the top fold. Then I decided to do warp face plane weave, so I had to move the warps closer together, and at the end you could see how nicely it worked. But it wasn't fun, and I was frustrated because I knew on my shaft loom I could have done this study in a day and I would have known exactly what I was doing instead of struggling with the loom to get the sheds right. It was clear this kind of weaving would never get me out of bed and into the studio. Then I set up the loom for handpicking warp designs as seen on the right, and I loved it. It made sense and the work flowed. I used patterns from Susan Falk's book, Weaving Pattern Bands. I've never woven on a rigid heddle loom, but within the space of a week, two of my friends who are not weavers and do not know each other asked me to help them with their rigid heddle looms. So I spent time looking at videos and was quite intrigued with the way people are dressing these looms. I see that they're excellent introductory looms, not too expensive and needing very little additional equipment or space. But it's not a loom I expect to use myself. And I'm embarrassed to say that when I did help one of my friends with her second warp, I managed to get everything wrong, including winding the warp on the front beam instead of the back, and making the warp so dense she couldn't get a shed. Of course, my philosophy is that mistakes are gifts, since you learn from them what not to do and also how to fix problems. But maybe I gave her too many gifts. This is my latest loom, or maybe I should say loom part. It's a rigid heddle with extra slots that are not as long as the normal slots. Susan Fuchs is demonstrating this heddle in her book, and she has some wonderful videos that give complete information on how to use this heddle for pickup designs. You can see she uses the heddle as part of a backstrap loom. So am I back at my beginnings? I haven't used the heddle yet, but I still love looking at it. So setting up my inkle for double weave is not the only time I use the wrong loom for weaving a project. If I had made this weaving brocade on my floor loom, it would have taken no time at all. But I had my TC1 set up with a black warp that I wanted for this idea, so I wove it on the TC1. The small colorful shapes woven with silks I dyed with natural dyes were inserted as supplementary weft brocade. On the TC1, that meant I had to create a lift plan on the computer that would make sense so I could see where I wanted to insert the threads. It took a lot of time, plus the weaving was much slower than if I had done it on a floor loom. Don't get me wrong, I love this weaving, but afterwards I shook my head at myself because I knew better. It's a clear example where a simple shaft loom would have been a better tool. On the other hand, I couldn't do a weaving that replicates my handwriting, like this detail from RIF 2, without my TC1 loom. I know how to hand pick the supplementary weft into the warp to create my handwriting, but I don't have the time left in my life to accomplish it. And also, if I was doing this by hand on a floor loom, I would probably have to work from a paper design underneath the warps to get the handwriting correct, and I would hate that. So once again, the right tool for the idea being expressed is important, as well as knowing your own preferred modes of working. I want to end with two images. This weaving is a deflected double weave, a detail from a blanket I made on an 8-shaft loom. The wefts travel from edge to edge. There's no hand manipulation going on, nor is there any need for color or dye work. It's clear that dynamic pattern making is possible on the shaft loom. And anyone who wants to see eye-dazzling designs from 4 shafts should open up a book on overshot weaves. So I'm going to end with this weaving, which has it all: words, scribbles, broken threads. And it says what was true for me, that a simple thread grew into my lifeline. I'm lucky to have owned many looms over my lifetime as a weaver, to have sold many of them, bought others, and to have the flexibility to go from one to the other, depending on my mood and my ideas. I wish the same for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bhakti. That was so lovely. And we'll do a round of applause in the class.
Thank you.
It was so nice to just see all of your work and to hear the story of how it evolved. And yeah, just thank you so much for sharing it. I want to turn it back over to Stephen to help
Okay.
us moderate some questions.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Laura. And please, everybody, drop your questions in the chat, and I will pull them from there. I just want to say, Bhakti, you made a comment that thinking about geological history helps calm your anxieties about the current world. And then I
Yes.
also looked at the motifs of your design starting, in the 1970s, and they seem to just have this timelessness where I could encounter them, without a context and think that they were current or ancient. And I guess my question for you is, when you're thinking through your motifs or you're thinking through a design, you draw from so many sources. You talked about your love of textile history. Could you talk just a little bit more about the choices you make in your creative practice and how that relates to that concept of geological history?
I don't know if I can.
It's fine.
Yeah, for me, it starts with an idea. Like everyone, I mean, concept is a big word. I don't think that when I was studying that we really thought of concept per se, and I think work about weaving is a concept. Um, but I would just say that there are textiles that just open my heart, you know? Like when I'm really depressed, I will pull a book out, like Louise Mackey's book that I mentioned. Um, it just makes me feel good. It makes me feel, it's like us listening to classical music and understanding that there are heights of possibilities within the human spirit. And of course, we're in times right now where it's all about shopping and hatred. Um, and I'm not immune from that. Um, but so the fact that I ended up in Mexico and Guatemala is really because I loved those textiles. I was so jealous of these were the poorest people that I have ever encountered. And yet they were weaving the most beautiful textiles in the world. And so that's why I say I place my work in the lineage of textiles. And then I'm just the most recent iteration of a weaver. Most of us will become the anonymous weavers or weaver once known. And so get an idea and then the imagery follows. And I will admit that I'm often stuck, that I feel like I know how to do everything, pretty much everything on a loom, but I don't know what's important enough to do. And so I can get really stuck. I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does. It's beautiful. I love that comment. Like, we're all known and one day we'll be unknown. I think that's just such a beautiful perspective for us as creators.
it's true.
Um, uh, a question came up here, just really quickly, about your mother and if she was also a weaver, and they also wanted you to maybe in relation to that talk a little bit more about your writing in your first book with her.
Yeah. No, my mother was a jeweler, and she had actually written a book on silver, making silver jewelry. And my mother was a great reader and writer. I think a frustrated writer. So when it came to this book, it just, I had all these notes from when I had been in Guatemala. I mean, I didn't know I was going to write a book when I lived there. Um, and so I went and and we were forced to do projects. That was, the late mid 70s. So everyone wanted projects. So though I wanted more of an anthropology book about the Mayan weavers in each of their towns, we did have to take the weaving from Panachel and turn it into, I don't know, a shawl or a purse or something. And my mother is the one who took all of my notes and made it coherent. And she did try it, so make sure that our instructions were correct. But no, she wasn't a weaver. And it was a great experience. I mean, it's an amazing thing to work with your mother as a colleague versus, the authoritarian. Now I was the authority, and she had to listen to me.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for that and for everything. I'm going to hand over the questions to Laura for a few questions for you. I think we have time for one or two before we send everybody off. And once again, thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing your work. Laura.
Yeah, so I'm just still keeping an eye on the chat. There is a question here that I'd love to hear your answer to, which is, how was your experience working on the Woven Pixel? Find it difficult to imagine how the two of you got your heads around explaining all these techniques. So much work to structure and transfer it all. So, yeah, maybe
Yeah,
just
well,
speak a little bit about that.
it was an amazing experience, and anyone who has met Alice Schlein knows that she is an extraordinary human being, just extraordinary, and has given so much to the textile community over the years. So I was living in New Mexico and she was in South Carolina. And we did a lot over the internet. I would write a chapter, she would write a chapter. We would read them, compare. I traveled to her house. She owned a TC1 then, I didn't. And I was able to work with her in the day and weave on her loom at night. It was a wonderful experience. And the thing that I liked the most was that Alice and I don't do things the same. And we made a commitment to put in the differences
Hmm.
because, the software programs that I had learned on, the ones that I liked the best, like Photoshop doesn't ever give you just one path from A to B. It's going to give you 100 different ways. And therefore, you can find the one that works for you. And so we tried to do that in our book too. And we both learned so much from each other. We're still very good friends, and she's still weaving up a storm. She's an amazing human being. So that was quite a wonderful experience in my life, and it's still reverberant. I use the Woven Pixel myself all
Oh,
the
so do
time.
I.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any questions in the room?
Can I just say, I only see a few people on my screen, but they're all really good friends, and thank you for being here. I so appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been lovely. We are at time, so I don't want to take up too much, and I'll let you go and let everyone get back to their day. But this has been such a warm space to kind of inhabit in person and on the internet. And thank you so much for sharing. And we'll save the chat and send it to you because there's a lot of words of appreciation. And I
Okay,
think
great.
you've definitely influenced and inspired so many people throughout your career and in this talk. And it's quite lovely to see. So yes, just thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
And yeah, just a reminder for those online who are asking, the YouTube channel for the Unstable Design Lab is where we archive all the talks. Stephen will get right on putting this one up as soon as we've edited it and, put it together nicely. And yeah, they will be there. So thank you so much, Bhakti, and we look forward to seeing what you make next.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right, goodbye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Fabulous.